where literacy proficiency evolves with technology and culture. This is the Multiliterate Mind podcast with Dr. Liza Trejo and Marnina Falk-Coleman.
Hello, and welcome to the Multiliterate Mind. I am Dr. Liza Trejo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Marnina Falk-Coleman.
Hi, Liza. I'm so excited to be here for our first episode.
Me too. Welcome, everybody. Together, we are exploring how language proficiency, multiliteracy, and human communication are evolving in an AI-driven world. We are so excited to welcome our guest and CEO and co-founder of Avant, David Bong, today.
Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are so excited to have you join us, especially to kick off this really exciting project. Before we dive in, we're going to give our listeners a bit of background about you.
David is the CEO and co-founder of Avant Assessment, which he launched in 2001 with his wife, Sheila, and Dr. Carl Falsgraf. His career includes co-founding a Silicon Valley startup, developing a newsreader app for the blind, leading the first international investigative consulting firm in Japan, and working in global business roles spanning technology, security, and consumer goods. David is a Japanese speaker and is excited to kick off this podcast as we celebrate Avant's 25th anniversary this year. Let's have a quick toast. Cheers to Avant. 25 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is so exciting. So before we start talking about Avant or proficiency, David, I'd really love to start with you and hear about how language, communication, cross-cultural experiences kind of shaped your path and ultimately led you to start Avant.
Well, in high school, I was not a particularly good language student. I took French and Latin and really didn't understand what it was for. I was just disconnected from my world. I grew up just outside of Boston, and up to the age of 18, I had never been outside of New England. Languages just were not connected to my reality. This was back in the day of the Vietnam War, so when I was in college, I thought I'd better learn something about Asia since, as you remember, we were very heavily involved in a war in Vietnam. So I took a survey course on Asia and just became absolutely fascinated with Japan. And that was kind of the beginning of the journey to actually exploring Japan as a country, as a culture, and the Japanese language.
And you ended up living there for how long?
So altogether, I ended up living in Japan about 10 years, a little bit more, and then in Hong Kong for a couple of years as well. So quite a while in Asia.
Wow. And as you think about your journey, was there a moment that kind of learning language either failed you or surprised you or challenged you?
Well, it's a never-ending challenge, as you both know as well. But I think the point in time that really struck me that the magic of language was when I was commuting into Tokyo to go to language school and sat next to a guy. And for the first time, I was able to actually have a conversation. He understood a few words that I said. I understood a few words that he said in Japanese. And it just was amazing. It opened up a whole new world. So I think that's the kind of point in time that I look at and think, yeah, language was really going to be very important in my life from that point on.
I love that. And how did you take that into investing your career in a language company? How did that kind of passion that was ignited there lead to what we know today as Avant?
Right. Well, in my job when I was in Japan in the 90s, when I set up and ran the investigative firm, language was critical in everything that we did. And many of the things that we investigated, frauds or extortions or threats, came about because there was a cultural or linguistic misunderstanding between managers and the people they were managing. So we would see over and over again Western managers who'd come into Japan and really understood very little about, the language or the culture, and they would surround themselves with kind of a group of sycophants who spoke English really well, but probably weren't the most talented people in the company. In Japan, there's a kind of a historic trend for people who weren't necessarily top students in secondary school to go overseas for college. The top ones would stay at home and go to Tokyo University or Kyoto University or Keio or Waseda, and they didn't necessarily speak very good English. So a lot of the times in situations like this, you'd have people at the lower levels who were doing the real work who didn't speak very good English. So they were cut off from the people who were managing. Wow. And occasionally they get really frustrated. So they would do bad things. They'd extort the company. They would send out messages that were aimed at discrediting the company. So those kinds of incidents happened over and over again, and I thought that it would be something to really go back to the States and change the way that language was learned and taught. My wife, Sheila, had similar experiences when she was working for Sumitomo Corporation. She's American, went to high school as an exchange student in Japan, and became very fluent in Japanese. She would negotiate on the Japanese side with American companies, and they just didn't understand what was going on. So the Japanese could kind of run circles around them. And, of course, she was on the Japanese side, so she was very happy to do that. But we both had these experiences, and we wanted to, as I said, change the way language was learned and taught. We found a professor at the University of Oregon after we'd moved to this town to raise our kids in Eugene. And he had created what then was the first world language assessment online. And it was designed to bring the new proficiency guidelines that had been created in the 90s to life. Because if you could have standards, but if you didn't have anything to measure them, if you didn't have an assessment that was scalable, accessible, and accurate, you really didn't know whether the standards were being used, whether teachers were teaching them or learners were learning against them. So the STAMP test, standard-based measurement of proficiency, was launched. We came in, my wife, Sheila, and I had some business experience and a little bit of money. Dr. Falsgraf had this test that he created with U.S. government funding, grant funding, and we got together. He wanted somebody to take this out where it could be used, someone with some business experience. We needed something to sell, something that could do what we wanted it to do. So we got together and started Avant on January 8th, 2001. So as you said, just barely 25 years.
Wow.
And I think we've had a real impact. Carl is thrilled that his baby that he created has actually been used in large numbers and has really had an impact on how language is learned and taught.
Yeah, I was going to say, it really resonated with me when you said change the way language was learned and taught. Because as a former world language teacher myself, I have seen that in action in the classroom and at a systems level and at a district-wide level, how when we change the way that we measure what students are able to do, it changes the point of entry as well. So, and that's kind of part of what we want to explore on this podcast. And so if we're looking at how not just the end point being proficiency, but of course the starting point as proficiency. So what do teachers understand about proficiency and how does that guide them in the classroom? I think you really have done just that. You've allowed teachers to take a whole different perspective on teaching world languages. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think the concept of proficiency was a relatively new one back then around 2000 because grammar translation had been the way that language had been taught. And certainly that was the way I was taught when I went through the programs at college. And grammar is really important. It's never not important. Right. But communication is what it's really all about. So proficiency, as you know, is about what you can really do with a language, whether it's reading, writing, speaking, or listening, engaging with real world tasks, producing language. That's what it's all about. And those elements of proficiency were what the guidelines had been created to guide teachers to begin teaching towards. And like you said, Liza, having the data from the test so the teacher could actually see whether their teaching was having the impact that they wanted it to have really created a dramatic change.
I agree. And if you don't mind me asking a follow-up question, you mentioned the listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I wonder in this current age where we're looking at other modalities and with the idea of multiliteracies being that students are now required to really make meaning out of text, so to speak, that could be viewing, that could be something creative, or it could be digital in the sense of AI. How do you see proficiency continuing to be important?
That's a great question, a very important one these days is AI is just revolutionizing so many aspects of our lives and our societies. We'll always have to communicate. I think it's a mistake to think that we're going to enter the Star Wars age where you have the universal translator and you can just plug that in your ear and you can communicate. Maybe someday, but it's not going to happen in our lifetimes. But AI is changing so much of what's important in language, what's important in measuring language. And then the elements in language that technology, AI can't address. So culture is something that AI has challenges with, in the sense that if you have a translating device, I mean, Google translates amazing, and the other ChatGPT does a great job translating. But you're translating the words, and there's something behind the words or inside the words that isn't. It just at this point in time isn't possible for the technology to capture and to put into the translations in a way that is understandable. I mean, things like, oh golly. So in Japan, the concept of hierarchy or register when you're addressing somebody who's older or went to a better university than you did, you change the way you speak. And that just is not reflected, to my knowledge, in the way that AI can translate. When we look at the testing world where we operate, there are real questions about whether we're testing the right things or not these days. When you look at writing, increasingly just everybody in business and in schools is using AI to write drafts. And we're testing how a test taker can write without the use of AI. But is that really what's going on in the world? I don't think so. So there was a tremendous paper written by the CEO of Language Cert. He used to be the CEO of Cambridge, Michael Milanovic, AI and Large-Scale International Language Testing, Challenges and Opportunities. And he talks about the concept of having two types of assessment. One is to assess how somebody can write using just their own mental framework. Another is to organize writing that they prompt AI to create for them. The second may be more important for businesses, because they really just want to know how somebody can use the AI tools to create communications that are important in business. A university may want to know whether a learner has the underlying mental capacity to create, because that's really important for the second or for the first model that I just described. If you don't understand what good writing is, meaning if you've never created it yourself, it's really hard to understand how to assemble writing that's been put together by AI. And I think learners or members of society who grew up and are growing up learning how to write themselves will have an advantage over those who just use the AI, in the sense that they'll be able to understand how to put ideas together, how to create insights that you wouldn't necessarily have by connecting dots in your own mind. It's kind of similar to those of us who grew up before calculators. I grew up in the era of slide rules, and you had to do a lot of mental arithmetic. Once you grew up in calculators, you didn't have to do that anymore. It just became a lost art. But I find that in business, it's enormously helpful for me to be able to calculate numbers in my head really fast. And that gives me an advantage over somebody who's, I don't really know what it is, I got to calculate it. I think it's going to be very similar in terms of writing. And so we as a testing company need to think about, though, what it is that we're really assessing.
And I think to bring that into, you started with this idea of proficiency as being able to communicate. And in writing, you're also finding your own voice. And it's almost, in our assessment, the speaking is that spontaneous communication and the writing is more polished. I have a friend who was just hiring someone for her company, and she talked about maybe having hundreds of applicants, and she could tell which ones had cover letters generated by AI. She's like, they all start to sound the same. There's a very common voice. It's about finding your voice. So I guess when we think of assessing it, it's interesting, because how do you teach students, or how do you teach language users more generally to use AI, but also make it sound like their own? And when we think about communication, where do you see that lying with that implementation of AI assisted writing? How do we ensure it's still the individual's thoughts and the individual's voice?
This is exactly where I think it's important to teach writing without using AI. Doesn't mean you're never going to use AI. It means you're going to be more effective at using AI. You'll be able to, I refer to AI as, there's an AI dialect. It's like written in a certain way, and you can tell. It's just like somebody coming from South Carolina or Michigan has a distinctive dialect. And being able to neutralize that dialect to come back to your own thoughts, your own creative ideas, is a skill that we have to teach. So yeah, I think that's how you can raise or educate learners who are going to be effective in the age of AI. I don't think you can just let AI do all your writing for you, because, like you said, that person will figure it out.
I love the idea of voice that both of you mentioned. And I think, I know I had listened to a podcast where they were talking about maybe using a little bit less AI in the younger years and then introducing it more in the older years, because kids, need to be able to have kind of what you were saying, David, that those early experiences with learning how to create language on their own, and then, working with the large language models that have already created it and now are putting it together and predicting language, and definitely not using only one or the other. But I think that's going to be a big job for teachers, businesses, everyone in the future, is figuring out exactly what you said. So how do we have our own voice? How do we help students use what's there well and wisely, and in such a way that it's going to make society better and the human race better, and not harm the creativity and the abilities that we have. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
I find it interesting that you kind of saw Proficiency take its footing and take off and evolve. And now you're kind of at the cutting edge of AI and starting that conversation of what does it mean to assess language capabilities in an age of AI? I guess I want to know to you, what do you still consider most fundamental, like those skills that we just have to still be able to do on our own? And what do you see kind of being a challenge to still uphold as language educators and as language assessors? Like, what are those two kind of, what's still fundamental and non-negotiable for you? And what do you feel might be something that's a challenge just in general? I know we talked about writing. I'm thinking more broadly in language ability.
Right. So as I had said earlier, I think the ability to communicate, both spoken and written, without the use of AI is critical. Speaking in a language that isn't your native language, especially actually engaging with human beings who come from that culture, who speak the various flavors of language, of their own language, so you understand different aspects of it. Without understanding what's behind the language, I don't think communication can be very effective. You can do it, but it misses a lot, and the opportunity for mistakes is enormous. In terms of assessment and so on, we started a company 5 years ago, a branch of Avant called Mira, that uses AI to create language learning and formative assessment. Liza, I know you were actively involved in the early days of that creating that tool. And with the use of AI and language learning and that formative assessment that digs into the errors and provides feedback to the learner and the teacher, I think that is the future for much of the assessment that takes place in the world. So the concept that doing the learning on the computer online enables the accumulation of a huge amount of data about someone's language skills. And this applies first language or second language. Then the ability to analyze all of that data, all the subtle elements of language gives the ability to essentially merge assessment and learning. So that the assessment is going to have so much more data to work with. And the affect, I think you'd say, of the test-taking environment disappears because, we've all taken tests, and I don't know anybody who likes taking tests because it's stressful. And when you're under stress, you're not going to do your best. And the idea of a test is, our stamp test is a very good test, but it's limited in the number of topics that it can cover, the range of language that it can have the test taker experience. And so it's a really artificial construct. When you're learning every day, speaking, engaging, writing, reading, you're just in your natural environment and you cover all the topics that you're using in your language. So that allows a much more rich, as I said, and accurate assessment of where individuals are in terms of their proficiency. And it also will get to the point where it supports the teachers so that they can lead the learners down the next stage of learning that the algorithms and the analysis of their learners' language can provide to them. So I think in the classroom, in a learning environment, the assessments that we do today are eventually going to go away, and they'll just be invisible. And people have talked about this for decades. The idea of assessment for learning, this is now the assessment and learning combined.
I love that. And if you don't mind, if I kind of highlight a few things that you said that were really powerful to make sure I understand them. You said merge assessment and learning, and that's kind of what you just said. But the power of that in the way that you were describing the way we go about our daily lives using language, it's almost like life provides those little mini assessments all the time. Did that person understand me or did they not? And the feedback I get is from their facial expressions, right? Or if they gave me the thing I asked for, or if they didn't. And that's so hard to duplicate in a language classroom. But it's almost, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's almost like you're saying with AI, because these large language models are so powerful and they're collecting so much data, it's almost like every child can be constantly experiencing that real life experience where I try something and I get this immediate feedback of whether it was right or wrong. And it's not exactly the same, obviously, as true human interaction, but it's a simulation of that in a certain way. They're getting this immediate feedback. So it's almost like they're just doing language, constantly getting feedback. The teachers can then kind of look at that feedback, make their tweaks, teach in here and there where they need to, and they go on about their way. Is that kind of what you were envisioning?
Absolutely.
Wow, that is mind-blowing. I love that.
So you're able to connect with an avatar, and you can, and a teacher in a class, you both know, you can only speak with a student couple of minutes per class if you divide, the hour by the 20 or 30 students in your class. But if you have a computer and a VR avatar that you can connect with and have a conversation with or do tasks with, all that data, is just so much more. And then the AI engines can analyze the language and come up with steps that the teacher can take to get the student to the next level.
Yeah.
And
so I'm hearing a lot more like tailored and targeted instruction, which is also where that data really comes into play. I think you're saying from the beginning, Avant tried to fill that missing gap of how are we seeing if what we're teaching is really working, and how do we know what our students are learning? So it provides that, but you're saying it doesn't replace that instruction that a teacher is still facilitating.
No. It complements the teacher. It allows the teacher to do more and be more powerful. You may have heard of the PHIL program that Tom Welch and some of the other leaders in the language community have developed. There was an experiment in Delaware with a teacher who just got his test results back, and his learners had decided they wanted to learn ASL. So PHIL basically is a program in which you have a classroom of students, and you're not going to teach them one language. You're going to let them decide what language they want to learn. And then they can find the tools, and the teacher can facilitate those and provide those tools so that they can learn on their own. And the teacher then is really a mentor in terms of how you develop skills that aren't dependent on an individual language, but they're tools you can use to be a more effective learner. And the program has been amazingly effective in terms of developing those proficiency levels that surprised the teachers. They did not expect that their students would learn that quickly.
I wonder why. I wonder if it has to do with if it's because the students were interested in, they chose the language, plus the medium that they're using is such a tailored medium where they're able to delve into getting the feedback right away. And plus they have a teacher who understands proficiency from start to finish, who's guiding them along the way. I don't know. I wonder if it's just all those things. I'd be so curious when they have a couple of years of data to do the research study on that and see what's working so well. Let's duplicate this.
It's going to require research to tease all that apart. But I think all the elements you described are important. Yeah. Personally, looking back at my own life, in high school, language didn't mean anything to me, so I was very unmotivated. When I went to Japan, you got to speak the language in order to eat, so it becomes quite important, and you're very, motivated to learn. So I think the idea of motivation and interest is a huge factor there.
And with that, when you talk about that tailored or target education and learning that you can do with AI, you're really able to incorporate the 35 students in front of you and all of their motivations and interests, which I know is a juggling act as a teacher. I was always struggling with how do I give enough attention, enough time, enough energy to each of these individual humans that deserove it. Yeah. How do I manage to do that with the time I have? I guess my question, go ahead.
No, I just and are all learning at different paces.
Exactly. Also
and have different interests and all the things that go into being an individual human being.
Also, and different abilities, people that have language processing difficulties or are heritage learners that are maybe ahead of the class. How can we still engage them and keep it interesting and meaningful? I was going to ask, because I think to pivot a little bit, but stay on this whole idea of what stakeholders are really considering, because I know AI also opens the door to not only offering more language, but maybe in districts that don't have enough staff, having that open. How do we continue to make the case for why it's so important to still have that language education and not just, oh, I'll learn it on my own on an app. I'll learn it outside. Like, how do we still make the case for this needing to be a core subject in school?
Well, the role of a teacher is critical in any learning. And to think that you can replace a classroom teacher with an app, I think is a mistake, at least now with the technology we have today. It's very hard to find teachers these days. It's a tough job, and anything that we can do to help leverage technology so that teachers can be more effective, so they can handle more students, and so the students can learn faster and better, I think is an important thing. So let's see. I lost my thought there for a minute. What was the question again?
I was just asking how we continue to make that case for, despite all this technology, why we still need language education to be part of that school budget.
Right.
Even when because I know, Phil, part of what that came out of was they didn't have capacity to maybe have a teacher offer all of those languages that students wanted. So this was a way to still be able to give the language classes, but in a unique kind of pivoted way that opens the doors for many of them.
Yeah. Well, I think the role of language education is misunderstood by most people. When you ask somebody why a learner has to go take 12 years of math, everybody says, well, of course. Well, why? How many times are you going to use calculus in your life? My son does because he's an engineer. But other than that, everything I learned after 8th grade in math just doesn't apply anymore. And yet I still continued on. Why? Because it teaches you logical thinking. It teaches you how to analyze problems and solve them, even if you don't use the exact formulas that you learned in school. Well, language teaches you lots of things. It teaches you perspective on how other people are operating, because you have to step in somebody else's shoes to understand their language. You have to understand what it's like to be a failure, if you will. Just like sports, everybody starts playing basketball, learning how to dribble the ball. You don't start by shooting threes all the time. In order to get to the point where you can shoot threes, you got to dribble the ball. Well, language is very humbling. And to be able to stand up in front of your peers and make essentially lots of mistakes is very humbling. And I think that humbling experience teaches you things that you just can't learn if you don't go through that experience. Teaches you empathy, all the soft skills that employers say that they want. Language skills are very powerful kind of analog for those soft skills. And there's research that's been done that demonstrates that. So language is a way of developing a lot of the skills that are needed in the workforce. Just like math is important because it teaches you how to think logically. Whether you can speak fluent French or not after 4 years of French, I mean, it's really great if you can, and certainly that's the goal of the language classroom. But there are also much more subtle, deep lessons being learned in that process that I think many administrators and just people in society don't recognize.
I agree with you 100%. And I would also add to what you said, the fact that there's such a growing population of other languages, not just in the United States, but across the world. You know, I was speaking to a professor from Spain, and they're seeing, multiple languages in their schools, and their teachers are having to figure out, how do I help these students learn? And how do, in every country they have people coming from other countries, or they're having to teach their languages. And so it's not even just like, it's, yes, everything you said 100%. And there's also this whole other, layer on top of that where, we're trying to help, anyone who's speaks another language that's not the most commonly spoken language in the country become more fluent, in order to help the country to continue to be, as strong and prosperous as it can be, as well as maybe we could learn some of their languages and we could all communicate and find some kind of common ground, So I think that those soft skills that you talked about, plus the fact that you can't learn a language without some culture, right? And so the culture that comes automatically within language is so powerful for everyone, in my opinion. But
Yep, I totally agree.
And I would also say it's not just soft skills, but also literacy. When you learn a second language, you learn how to express yourself better, how to write better, how to read better. And like you said, I don't know what career exists where they don't expect people to be able to communicate and collaborate at this point. And so much of that comes from also, me speaking 4 languages, learning how to communicate and kind of almost code switch, almost shift to that, and understanding how to present myself professionally, more casually, and kind of those little skills and interdisciplinary skills. I taught a lot with my ELA teacher and reinforcing that. So I guess it's really interesting how you put it, that it's not seen as a core subject. It's not respected as that, but it should be. So how do you think we could start to shift that on a bigger scale? Besides this wonderful audience listening, how do we start to have those conversations? I think that's so important.
Well, I think just getting out and talking about it is one thing. It's a long campaign, but we have to keep the message going that language is important for those reasons. And then I think we can work to make language learning more effective. So you don't have somebody. How many thousands of times have you talked to somebody said, "Oh, I took Spanish for 2 years and all I can say is hola," right?
I could retire if I had $1 for everyone that told me that.
So that we make learning more effective, and that's our job as an ed tech company that providing assessments, providing learning programs. I think those are all really, really important. So it's a long battle, but we're fighting it.
Yes.
I love that. And I just thank you so much for your passion really shows through.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
the amount that you really care about the world language community and the future of this industry is contagious. So I want to kind of wrap us up with, is there anything that you would want our listeners or viewers to leave with? If you could give them one takeaway, one message, something to kind of carry on through this conversation and beyond, what would it be?
Well, I think everybody should have the opportunity to go to a place where they don't speak a language and figure out how to survive, to get along, and that will open their eyes and their minds in ways that nothing else can.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, David, and thank you everyone for listening. If you were intrigued by something in this episode and want to add to this conversation, comment below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast in your networks.
Thank you all very much for having me.
Language proficiency isn't a single moment, it's a journey.
At Avant, we support the entire proficiency cycle, from learning to assessing real-world language use to certifying skills that open doors beyond the classroom. Our connected platform gives educators clear data, less guesswork, and meaningful ways to recognize what learners can truly do with language.
If you're looking for a better way to support growth, from first practice to verified proficiency, visit avantlanguage.com.
Avant, the language proficiency company.